Hello everyone, welcome to a completely off-the-cuff video. I've heard a rumor recently that a bunch of Unity developers are interested in trying out Godot. So I thought I'd make a kind of onboarding type video. I'm going to show off a little bit of Godot, talk about why I'm using it, and hopefully get you guys up and running if you're interested in trying this out for yourselves. A quick thing about me, my name is Matthew. I have not released a fully fledged game yet, but I've been working on this thing called 20 Games Challenge, which is basically me learning to make video games. You can be part of the challenge too if you want, but here's my latest one. I've been working on Space Cadet Pinball. This video isn't out yet, but it will be at some point. So this is a 3D game, fully featured, uses the physics engine, and it works pretty well. So I would recommend Godot for 2D especially, but also even for 3D, things like this. Only issues I've run into so far have been issues in my own abilities, which I think a lot of us can relate to, even if we want to pretend that we don't. But that's enough about me. Let's jump in with Godot itself. I'm up here with the Godot download page. You'll notice there are two options. A lot of people are tempted to go for the .NET option. It has C# support. I hear a lot of people coming from Unity are saying, I really want to use C#. If you really know that you want to use it, you can try that. However, if you have only ever used C# and you're afraid of using another language, I would really encourage you to just try the Godot engine before you do the .NET version. The great thing about computer programming languages is once you know generally how they work, it doesn't change all that much. So you're still using for loops and if statements and all those things that you already learned in C#, it does transfer over. So you get the Godot engine, you're gonna start your first project, and here we go. Now I do have a Blender file already. I just threw a couple monkeys in here. The great thing is I can go ahead and save this scene, and I come over here to this game and it'll re-import these assets right away. So I can take this whatever.blend and drag it into the scene, and there it is. So I think that transform got reset. But we have monkeys in the scene. So that's simple. You can just drag it straight in. You don't need to do any exporting. You used to have to, but now you just can use a blend file. So that's kind of nice. With that said, if you click play on this project, we'll say select current scene. We'll call this game, and nothing is happening. That's because we don't have a camera. So the first thing you need in all 3D scenes is a camera 3D. In a 2D scene, you don't need a camera, but in a 3D scene, you do. So you can see preview. This is what we're going to see. If I click run, you are now going to see nothing again. And the camera is working this time, but if I turn off these two options, you'll see that these monkeys are nearly invisible. They're the same color as the background. So these are the preview of the default sunlight and the default world environment. So if you come in here, I actually had changed this color earlier, but you have a sun color. We can pick whatever we want. We'll do maybe a little bit of blue. So mostly white, a little bit of blue, whatever. You can click add sun to scene and it will add a directional light 3D. And then you also want a world environment. So if we add environment to scene, there we go, these two elements. Now you click play and you have a 3D scene with 3D lighting. So that is getting started with 3D. You can do a lot more here, but we're going to keep it pretty simple. I'm going to just make a mesh shape. So if you do a mesh instance 3D, you can import geometry like we did from Blender, but you can also do primitives. So I'm going to have a plain mesh. The size in 3D is in meters. So we're going to do 20 meters by 20 meters. We're going to move this down. You can hold control to snap. And then we are going to change the color. So for this one, you can create a material. You can do shaders, all sorts of fancy things, but you can just do a standard material, go down to albedo, and you can change the color here. And we'll do like a nice green for grass, I guess. And then we will duplicate that and rotate it and make a kind of sky back there. I'm not going to use the skybox. I'm going to leave the world environment node in, but we're not going to be using the skybox colors. Now, if I go to this one and I change the material color, what's going to happen is the color changes for both of them. That's because objects are linked by default in Godot. If you copy things, you get copies of the same object. So the way to fix that is to revert that change, go right click, and then say make unique, and that'll make the mesh unique so I can change the size, but I'm going to want to actually make both unique. So make unique recursive. Now we have two different things. And if I come in here to the material and I change that color again, you'll see that it only changes the color of this one. So there we go. We have a scene with a couple monkeys on a lovely blue background. And the background isn't quite wide enough, so we'll just make that way bigger than it needs to be because who cares? So that was a super quick and dirty intro to 3D objects. Now we're going to actually start talking about how this scene tree works. So in Godot, you only have a scene tree. You don't have scenes and prefabs. Everything is a scene. So I'm going to add another object here. We're going to do a node 2D. And you notice everything just disappeared. That's because it automatically switches between the 3D and 2D scene views. Now in Unity, you had everything was in one scene view. So if I do a sprite 3D and I drag in, say, the default Godot icon, you'll see here that this is positional in 3D space. And this is what you do with Unity. In Godot, you would only ever want to use this if you are making like a 2.5D game where you have billboarded sprites in a 3D world. So we're not going to be doing this. We are going to be making a 2D sprite instead. Oh, and by the way, if you drag a texture onto this, you get that automatically on that material. So you can apply textures to materials that way too. So we're going to delete this. This is a 3D node, and we're going to move everything into 2D instead. So here we are in our 2D scene. And if we were to delete the camera and play it again, remember, we don't see anything. We only see what we're seeing in this 2D. So I am going to go into the project settings, and the first thing I want to change is the window size. Okay, I already did change this, so 1600 by 900. I think it defaults to something 1152 by 648, which I don't know where they got those numbers. I'm going to do something that's a little more round, easier to work with. The other thing you can do is you can go into your configure snapping and change your grid step if you want. I'm going to be using that, but we're going to be here in this 2D node, and oh, what's that? Pong. Yeah, let's make Pong, why not? So we're going to start with a static body, and this is going to be how everything in Godot works. So you have a static body 2D. This is going to be something like level geometry. You can then add, every static body needs a shape. So every static body needs a shape. So here's a collision shape 2D. We're going to make that a rectangle shape. And then you can see here, this can be moved. So we'll just snap to this, and then we'll just drag this across. And this is going to be our shape. And you see these lines here, the purple and the blue, these are the bounds of the screen. So everything is measured in pixels in 2D. In 3D, it's meters, in 2D, it's pixels. We're also going to add a rectangle, and we can do a color rectangle. And this one is going to also go here. So we will snap and snap. And that is going to be one element in the game. Now, one thing with this, we just added these pieces in, but let's say we want to now move the parent object. Okay, so if I click on one of these guys, it's going to select that object. And if I move it, it's going to then be separated from that collision shape below it. So something you can do, you can click on the static body 2D, and you can click on this to lock it. So here we go. This is now a full physics object in the scene. And static means that it is a non-moving physics object. So we're going to duplicate that and move it to the bottom. And now we have a ceiling and a floor to this game. So we're going to add one more object. We're going to do the same thing. Except this time, we're going to do a rigid body 2D. So rigid is going to be things that are affected by physics simulations. So we're going to, again, add a collision shape. Notice you do have recents down here, so you can just click that if you don't want to go searching for it. We'll do another color rectangle, why not? And there we go. There's our rectangle. We're going to go to the shape. It's giving me a warning because I don't have a shape defined. We want it to be another rectangle, and we want this and that to be the same. So we'll just expand that and expand that and move this up and shrink that, and now we have this. So we're going to lock it, so when we select it we get the whole object at once, and then we're just going to move it up here, and if we click play, what's going to happen is this is going to fall because we have gravity by default, and you can change all this in the project settings. So there we go, we have a cube that can fall to the ground, and you notice it kind of bounced a little, it didn't go through, but it has all of these physical interactions built in. So we're actually going to change this though. Instead of doing a rigid body, I want to be able to control it a little bit more. So we're going to do a change type, and we're going to switch it over from a rigid body to a character body. It was renamed for Godot 4. It used to be kinematic. So here's a character body now, and we're going to slide it over, and it's still called rigid body 2D. So we're going to call it ball, and we are making Pong now. So we're going to add in a script, and we're going to have a script called ball. And actually, before I do that, I'm going to right click, and I'm going to do save branch as scene. So like I said, in Godot, we do not have prefabs like you do in Unity, but if I click Save Branch as Scene and we'll save ball.scene, you can see now this little icon means that this is its own scene. So I click this, I get a new tab here, ball. Something that was really confusing to me at first is if you have scripts, so we have a ball script, and we're going to come here and we're going to add a game script as well. And if you change scenes, you will change to the open script for that scene, but also you can change, so I can be looking at the ball script in the game scene. If I click the ball, I go to the ball script. If I click back, I go to the game. So that's just something to keep in mind, that there's a couple different tabs you can use here. One thing that's going to be really important later on is you can actually drag things into these. So if I hold control and drag it in, I now have a variable that I can mess with. But if you have the wrong scene open, if I have the game script and I try to drag this in, it's going to give me a warning. So you want to make sure that you're using these tabs on top, not just these tabs on the side. And before we get into scripting, I just want to reiterate that this is a 2D node we're doing, but there is a character body 3D, and it is going to be exactly the same thing, just one more dimension, and some things are a little different, but generally speaking, things are identical on both branches. So if you've done it in 2D, you can do it in 3D and vice versa. But we're going to stick with 2D today because I am lazy. So here we go. The first thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to have some values that I export. So export is going to mean it shows up in the editor, so I can edit it over here, just like some of these. So we're going to do a export var start velocity, and then we are going to say this is of type vector2, and it is equal to vector2.0. This is strongly typed, which I like doing. You don't need this part. You can use weak typing, but I prefer that. So we'll set this one to a speed of, let's say, 300. And then we're going to have another one. This one is going to be an integer. We're just going to set this one to 100. And so this is equivalent to coming in here and saying this is of type int. You can not have that, and if it can be inferred, it will assign it, and this is also strongly typed. So there are two ways of doing that. And then I am also going to want a var, and we're going to say starting position, and that is going to be a vector2, and this one does not have a value, meaning if we use it, we're going to get null. So we're going to want to then start with some of our default functions. So there's a few functions. I have my editor set up where it doesn't populate it, but you may have some default functions. One of the first one is going to be the ready function. This is called when the node is first initialized into the scene. So this is kind of the first thing where you want to set stuff up. So we're going to do something like starting position equals position. Now you have actually two variables here. You have position and you have global position. And global position is in reference to the world. You can imagine if this is a child of something that is like scaled at 20%, then your local position would be off by a factor of 20. So you may want to use global position as a rule of thumb unless you know that you need to use the local position for some specific reason. Same thing goes with rotation and other things. And then we are going to do velocity vector, I think, equals start velocity. And, you know, I think we're actually going to want to use this. Let's call it, I don't know. This is because velocity will be updated by something we're doing in a bit. Now, there are two things you can do here. So our next function, you can do a process, and I'm going to put an underscore before that because you'll get a warning if you have unused variables. And we're going to call move and slide. And this is going to take our velocity here and it is going to apply it to our ball. And so if we go ahead and click play, we will see nothing happens because I didn't set this to anything because I renamed it and it lost its value. There we go. 300. And you see it's moving. If you notice, it's a little bit jittery. Let me do that again. See, that is not perfectly smooth. And the reason for that is we're doing this in the process function. So process is actually happening every frame. There is a fixed physics process that you may want to use instead. And you'll see I'm getting this little warning down here, unused parameter. So again, you just put an underscore and that goes away. Normally you don't have parameters unless you're overriding a default function like we are doing right now. I should probably make this text larger, shouldn't I? So that's how this is going to work. So we have a ball that is moving and sliding. I'm going to add a couple more quick things, and then we are going to come back to this. There we go, 2D3. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to change the collision shape. And if you recall, we are sharing properties. So if I change this shape here, for this one, it's going to change the shape for all the other ones. So before I change the shape, I need to go and I need to do either a new rectangle shape or I click make unique. We'll do a new rectangle shape. So here's our now undefined kind of default shape. We're going to go, we're going to stretch something out, and then we're going to come and we're going to take this one. And I believe that these color rectangles don't have the same issue. I'm going to click this button so we do not have to, you can just click on it now and you can move things, but once I'm done, I'll put it back so we make sure to select all the objects together. So we're going to do that. And then final thing is going to be important for this one in particular. You'll notice that my transform appears to be way, way out here. So we're going to highlight these two. We're going to go to transform. Oh, just kidding. This one, we're going to go to transform and we're going to reset that. And then we're going to drag this one to match. So these are now together, sort of. My snapping is a little bit too granular, but that was my fault. I chose that. So I'm going to change this one. This is a static body currently, but I'm going to want it to move. So there's a couple things you can do. If I type a body, you can see I have a few options here. Animatable body is a good option. You can see it's a 2D physics body that can't be moved by external forces, but it can be moved manually. I'm going to do a character body again because this one will give me a couple nice options for movement. So we have a character body called left. We're going to duplicate it and make a second one called right. And these are going to be our paddles for our game. So we're going to move this one over, and you know what happened? This got reset somehow. I think I did like a global undo or something. There we go. This now should be fitting the screen more or less. So that one's called left, that one's called right. If I hit play though, you'll see this will go and it'll stop because these are all physics objects and they are interacting with each other, which is pretty nice. Okay, I'm going to really quickly adjust a couple things, just get the sizes down. I think this is going to look and feel a little bit nicer. So we have our objects in kind of a little bit thicker, I think, just because I'm doing this for camera. I want you guys to be able to see what I'm doing when we play this scene. So we're going to go ahead and hit play, and I wrote move and collide, or move and slide, which means this is going to hit and it's going to stop when it runs into something. And so the next thing we're going to want to do is actually extend the script to do more than just moving and sliding. So again, this is the ball. So the first thing we want to do is bounce off a paddle. So we have a few options here. We have if, is, and we have on ceiling, on floor, and on wall. So we want to say if we're on wall, and we're going to want to do, we have a velocity vector. So that is going to be velocity.x equals negative velocity.x. And so setting the velocity to negative velocity will essentially turn it around. Of course, this is my local variable. The reason I'm not just using velocity here is because this actually will be set to 0 by default in move and slide. So I want to store my own value. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do velocity equals vel. Even with move and slide, it should bounce. So let's try this and see what it does. We should see it turning around when it hits, and it does. We're going to then jump on over to the paddles. We want to get those moving next. And because I have two paddles, I'm going to go ahead and save this again as a scene. And we are then going to duplicate this and delete this. So we now have two copies of the scene, and we can then just make sure to move it because the right one is now over there. And we now have our player. So now we're going to add a script, paddle.gg. And for this one, we're going to want to do a couple things. Now what we're going to do here is process inputs. A nice thing is we actually have an input map. So there are some built-in actions, they're hidden by default, but I'm going to want to add some of my own actions. Okay, so we are going to call this left up, left down, right up, right down. Now for these, you can just click the little plus, it'll listen for an input automatically, and then you just hit OK. So WS, and then right is going to be the arrow keys. We're going to have up and down. The thing is, if you have a controller, as I do, it will also listen for those inputs. So you can just hit this, press the button, and it automatically shows up. So we can have keyboard and controller support automatically out of the box. So now we have a keyboard and a controller. I'm going to close that, and then we are going to start listening. So we're going to do input, and we want to do is action just pressed only triggers once. Is action pressed will trigger continually. So we want to check, we want to be listening for the left down, velocity equals, and we can do vector2 dot down multiplied by the speed. So that's going to be setting our velocity. So this script is pretty basic. It's going to be using vectors and same thing as Unity would do. The only unique thing is this is action pressed. So I'm going to then do the same thing, but for the right one. So the inputs are going to be, and we should have these moving paddles now. Now, the one thing with just setting the velocity, that's not going to actually do anything. If I hit play, you see they don't move. But if I come back in and I make sure to add that move and slide that we were using before, and then I did set this up where this one needs to be player R. So we now have the two players. So if I hit play, you can see that these now move. And the great thing about this is I don't need to worry about it. If I hit the top, it stops moving because these are set up to automatically collide with things. You'll notice that the ball doesn't actually bounce. So I'm going to update the script. We're going to skip through this part because this isn't really showing off anything particularly interesting in Godot. It's kind of similar how you do, I think, a lot of things in Unity. So I updated the script to kind of start working. One thing I did, I wanted to check if the paddle is of paddle type. Something you can do that's kind of useful is you can do a class name, and then you can check if a script is of a certain type. So what I'm doing here is with this move and slide I was doing, I can check if I have collisions, and then I can get that slide collision. And the interesting thing about this is if I don't know how this function works, you can hold control and click on it, and it'll take you straight to the documentation. So for this one, I actually was curious about how this one works, and I found this example usage. And so I just used essentially this exact code in my script. So super useful. There's documentation built in. You can also click up here. It says doc. You can click on there as well. But so I'm basically just checking for what objects I'm colliding with. It should just be the paddle. So I'm getting the paddle, and then I'm going to do some math between my Y position and its Y position, and I will use that to bounce. And I had a debugging print. I don't need that. If you're debugging something like this, what you can do is click over here, and you get this red dot. This is your breakpoint. So if I hit play, and then I wait for it to hit, when it collides, I will see that I am now here. So I can press F11 to step through. That was F12, so 1 second, F11, not F12. So hit F11 to step to the next thing, and I can see that this was set, so I now have, okay, velocity.y is what I cared about, that's negative 129, so that appears to be doing what I want. And then I have that print statement. So there are other things like there's a profiler and lots of great things that you should definitely learn about, but for now, just knowing how to use breakpoints in Godot, it's super simple, super useful. You just click over here. So keep going. And we should be back in the game, and this should now be bouncing vertically. So now I have the ball will bounce and it'll move around, but it will leave the screen and it won't come back. So we're going to want to do something about that. And for that, we're going to want to detect collisions. Now, you don't actually detect collisions between these collider objects. You detect them between areas. So I'm going to come into my layers. I'm going to edit the names. I'm going to call this one physics because these are all the collisions. And I'm going to call this one ball detect. And I like using a layer for detecting things that you are detecting all the time, like the player. And so in this ball, I'm just going to add a layer 2. So this is going to be detected on layer 2. And then I'm going to add something to detect it on layer 2. So back into the game, I'm going to add an area 2D. So the bodies are kind of physical objects. The areas are used for detection. So this isn't a 2D object. This is a 2D space that objects can enter. And you can actually do things like modify gravity and other things within the areas, but we're just sticking with detecting things. So we need a collision shape again, and we want that to be another rectangle, and we're going to want it to be about this whole size of this thing. So here's our area 2D. We're going to call this detect left. We're going to duplicate it, and this is going to be detect right. Now, if we want to detect when the player has entered one of these areas, all we need to do is to go into the settings on both of these and go to the collision layer, and we don't need a layer, but we do need a mask on layer 2. So the only thing that can enter these is the player. So if the paddle or something else were to somehow get in there, it would not trigger a signal, only the player will, because only the player is on layer 2. So these are our detectors. You can come in here and you can see there's a lot of signals. This is how you're going to connect things in Godot. So you want to call down, but you want to signal up. So since we're going to be calling into a game script up here, which I'll add real quick, here's our game script. We want to call into this one. So we are going to signal up to it, and we're going to have a body entered. The player is a body, not an area. So when a body enters this area, we're going to emit a signal. So we're going to go on detect left, body entered. Same thing on detect right, body entered. And these are both emitting signals. And again, the only thing they're detecting is the player, so we don't need to do any extra checks. If we are in this function, it means that the player has reached the end zone. So we are going to take the ball, which is right here, and we're going to drag it in. You hold control and you can just drop it in like that. Otherwise, you could type this out. That's a nice shortcut. And so if the ball entered, we are going to want to reset it. So ball, and I already added a reset function. Thought I did. Let me double check. So go to ball. Yep, here we are. So we actually are going to set a flag as true because sometimes modifying physics outside of the physics process doesn't work. So we're going to have a little bit of function here that will store that flag, and then we'll reset our location and velocity when we are in a physics process. Otherwise, things get overwritten by the physics engine. So we want to do that. Same thing here. And then the other thing we want to do is we want to actually display and show this score. So we're going to come back in to the 2D view, and we're going to add some sort of visible element. So we're going to use a label for this. This is a GUI element, and it's pretty much exactly the same as what we've been doing. GUIs obviously can be built a little differently. You have lots of kind of control things and whatever, but you can also drag them around. So we're not going to get into advanced GUIs today. We're just going to drop this in. That's going to say 1, and you can see that's tiny. So we don't want to change the scale. You could come into the scale of this thing and make it look a lot bigger, but it makes more sense to come into the font size and make the font size bigger. So there we go. That seems about right. So here we go. That's 1. And then we're going to call this left score. We're going to duplicate that one to right score, and the right score. Oh, and this one is going to be centered on the right. So there we go. We have our 2 scores displayed. Again, we're going to come back into the script, and we're going to control drag them in, and then we're going to want to set them. So we're also going to probably want a left score dot text equals left. I think that's going to throw an error. I think we have to convert that to a string. Yep. So that's an int. We need to do string. So we'll just do a string conversion real quick. Left plus equals 1. And that should be it. So I'm going to come back into the main game. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I was exporting things. So some of these speeds felt a little low. Well, I can just come in here and I can change them here. So that might be too fast, but whatever. Okay, and I'm just doing a little bit of final tweaking on some of these values because we exported them, makes it easier to change things. So if we want to make that like 600 and 300, we'll see what that turns into. And we are already starting to move a bit quicker, which is good. You should see if we go off the screen. Okay, 1, 2, 3. If we go off the screen the other way, that should be 1, and it resets to the middle. So super simple. The last thing, we don't have any audio, so I did have a sound effect. In order to add these, there are a couple options. We're just going to add one to the ball. But if we take this and we put a sound effect in, you notice it doesn't do anything. So we actually do need to add a sound type. So there's a couple things we can do. If I look audio, you'll see we have, just within 2D, we have an audio stream player that plays it non-positionally. This is great for like music, something that you want to have everywhere, but you can also play it positionally in 2D space. So we're going to attach this to the ball, and then we're going to come back to the main scene, and we're also going to add a listener. So here is a audio listener 2D. We don't want that to be a child of there. There we go. And so the audio listener is somewhere. Oh, it ended up in the middle. Perfect. So we have an audio listener here. We have a ball, and the ball will have its own positional audio that will travel with it. And so if we turn up this panning strength, we should be able to see that. We do want to add this in though. So again, control drag, here we go. Audio stream player 2D. I think I drug this in the middle of something else. Yep, I did. There we go. We're just going to say every time we hit something, we are going to play the audio. So audio player, play, and play, and play. So hit play, and we should hear the ball bouncing, theoretically. If I add the clip to the thing, you'll hear it. So drag this into the stream, and there we go. We now have a sound. So you should hear it now, bouncing. So there we go. We made Pong in a few minutes. So there is a lot more to learn, but that's backwards. Is that backwards? I meant to subtract the paddle's velocity. I ended up subtracting something else. So even in a game this simple, you're going to have bugs. But anyways, I know what I was doing. I was trying to multiply this. Anyways, we probably don't need to get lost in the weeds any more than we already have. This was just a quick project to showcase some of the major functions of Godot. Obviously, there's a lot more. Like I said, you can control click on these to read documentation. I'd advise taking a look at the online Godot docs if you want more too, and feel free to experiment. And if you're interested in what I've been doing with the 20 Games Challenge, you are more than welcome to join that too. So I'll have links for all that stuff below. It has been quite fun and useful learning to make games by recreating some classics. But yeah, here we are with Ugly Pong, is what we'll call this one. And it was just a little quick experiment in learning how these systems work. A couple final thoughts. You may have noticed that I've been only using this screen. Unfortunately, that's because unlike Unity, you don't have this one updating when the game is playing. You do have a remote view here, so I can go in and do things like this beep is annoying, so we're gonna shut that off, and this is only changing it on the remote. The local one, if I come into the ball, you'll see that this hasn't actually been touched. So you can change things for just the remote, and that's a way to view that remote scene, but you don't get any live previews here. Again, everything is just going to be built out of these trees, and you can really see it in the remote, how all of this is layered out. One other thing I didn't need in this project, but if you go into project settings, you can also add global singletons. So for auto load, if I wanted a script to exist at the root of the scene, I can go and I can find one, and I don't know what won't break everything. A ball? A ball might break everything, but we'll add a ball here. And if we add it, we now have a global ball. And so if I actually come into like a script, I can reference that singleton. So ball is now a singleton object, even though I didn't name this one ball class like I did with the paddle. There is a globally available ball. So you can do that. And if I know I broke everything. If I reset this, there should now be probably a second ball, actually. I don't even know where that one shows up, if anywhere. But you can have those auto loads. So things like a global values or whatever, you can put singletons here. So yeah, I think I'm going to leave it here. This is my first time trying something like this. So I have never done a video like this before, so feel free to let me know what you think, if this was worth making. I actually did this in a full night. I've never made a video in less than 2 weeks before, so this was an adventure for me as well. So to all of you who have been considering Godot, I hope this has been a interesting and useful little kind of onboarding tutorial. Whether you end up using Godot or not for your future games, I hope that this was useful to you, and I will maybe see you in the next one. Thank you for watching.